Hey there, everybody. Seja here, and welcome to the fourth and final part of our Alchemy and Herbalism series. Hopefully, you've been getting inspired and illuminated a little bit on the tradition of alchemy and the profound influence that it can have on your work with medicinal plants and as an herbalist. And, this week's discussion is kind of taking it to another step here, another level, and looking at how alchemy really sees disease and healing and what exactly alchemically prepared herbal medicines or spagyrics are doing. What happens when you start working with spagyrics? Because as we've found over the years, these types of herbal medicines have a pretty different way that they affect us than, your standard forms of herbal preparations. So, last week I was kind of introducing a little bit about spagyrics and kind of how they're different from standard herbal extracts and the way in which spagyrics are, as this branch of the alchemical tradition that focuses on working with plants, how they are really working holistically on the whole person because they contain the whole plant in the way that they are concentrating the chemical, the energetic, and the spiritual properties of the plants. They are then working on the physical, psychological, and spiritual levels within a person that takes them. But how exactly are they healing us? What's going on there? And how does alchemy view health and disease, right? So I like to summarize this in a short little statement, which is, our illness is our initiation. And what do I mean by that? Well, basically, according to alchemy, everything in nature is in a constant state of change and flux and transition or transformation. And from looking at nature, we see that, everything is always changing and transforming from, the turning of the seasons and the cycles of the moon and, the way that plants grow, the way that animals migrate and go through hibernation, and everything in nature is going through these processes of transformation, and human beings are not separate from that, even though we've built a world to kind of try to separate ourselves from nature. We ultimately can't do that. And when we do, it ultimately makes us sick in different ways. But we see that in alchemy, everything is in a state of transformation. And in that way, from the human side of it, it's that transformation is seen as ourselves striving towards a greater level of wholeness within ourselves and wholeness with our environment, or harmony, equilibrium with our environment, and coming to a place of ultimately unity with the world in which we live. Looking at it from a spiritual side of it, alchemy is ultimately a spiritual practice as well as a practice of medicine. But inherent to its orientation to medicine is that our spiritual development is inherently tied to our healing process. So the way I like to think of it is that, healing and our soul's evolution or development are really two sides of the same leaf, right? And anyone that's ever embarked on a spiritual path, which to me is really just wanting to become a better person, right? Wanting to reach a greater level of self-awareness and collective awareness and universal awareness. Anyone that's embarked on that journey, we always come up to those challenges, right? We always hit those blockages. We hit those parts of ourselves that are resistant to change, that are resistant to transforming, that are stuck in the past, right? We've all gone through different levels and types of trauma really throughout our lives that can really hold us back from developing and growing and evolving spiritually. So whenever we try to do that, inevitably we discover that we have healing work to do, right? That we have to come to a new level of awareness and perspective on our lives. And really the way I like to think of it is taking our trauma and turning it into our transformation. And that really is so much of what alchemy is about, right? Taking poison and turning it into medicine, taking our wound and turning it into our strength and our gift and our power and something that we can do something good with out in the world, right? And that everything happens to us in our lives for a reason and is there to teach us. It's there to show us how we can be a better human being. And so when we're looking at the perspective of like disease or, health problems and health through the lens of alchemy, really seeing that sickness or that disease is where we get stuck. It's where our vital force gets stuck. It's where maybe part of our spirit or soul gets kind of stuck, oftentimes, usually in the past, due to some sort of trauma. And that our pathway towards healing is taking that and transforming it into something good. And the way that's typically seen, the way I was talking about in the second part of this series, I was talking about how, we as humans are a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? That we contain the wholeness of creation within us. And the way alchemy views that is according to this pattern of, the solar system, of the planets, and here on the earth looking at the elements, and that we contain all those planetary and elemental forces within us. And some of those forces we have very well integrated. We're in a really great relationship with them. We know how to express them in a healthy and in a virtuous way. But some of those archetypal patterns we don't get along so well with, or we don't understand. They're a little bit incongruous with our own innate constitution. And so we see that some of these archetypal powers, sometimes we will express in excess, like too much of that quality, or we might have it in some form of a deficiency, like we're not well integrated with that part of our psyche and its corresponding quality in the cosmos. And so then these are the archetypes that can sometimes give us a hard time, meaning that they are trying to find a way to get a message through to us that shows us, hey, you're not living in accordance with kind of my rules, right? Like fire has rules and kind of a certain order and way that it functions in a healthily expressed way. And when we don't live that way, it can burn us, right? So we can start to have kind of problems associated with that archetype. And what we commonly see is that, these archetypes are affecting us on a soul level, on kind of those lessons that we need to learn to grow and evolve as a human being. Those archetypes also affect us on the spirit level, or what in alchemy is referred to as Mercury. So kind of our psychological state, our emotional health. And those archetypes also have a physical reflection within our body, right? What organ systems tend to be strong or weak, and our constitution, and maybe our predispositions for disease and health imbalances. We can understand all those layers of ourselves through this pattern of these archetypes, the planets and the elements and things like that. And so basically, when we are incongruous with one of those archetypes, oftentimes it sends us messages, right? It's communicating to us and kind of setting up our life circumstances as such that we will be faced with challenges in order for us to overcome those challenges so that we learn and grow. And sometimes when we don't get the message, right, when we don't get the lesson and we keep making the same mistakes and have the same habits and have the same patterns, and we're still not embodying a virtuous expression of that archetype, then it's going to start affecting our minds and our emotions, right? And now we're thinking and feeling things and challenges in that way too. And sometimes we still don't get that message, and then it can materialize in the physical body, right? And give us health problems, symptoms, diseases, imbalances that correlate to the organ systems and the tissues that particular archetype corresponds to. And these are all ultimately ways that, life and nature is striving to teach us and make us ultimately more whole, so that we're in harmony with that wholeness of creation. And so, for example, we could think of the planet Venus, right? So Venus, or the morning star, in astrology, oftentimes is said to, relate to our relationships, right? It has to do with how we interact and interface with the other. And so it has, everything to do with relationships and love and intimacy. And, it's considered this archetype of our bonding to others and being able to be in harmony with our, with the other, right? With that's other people, or whether that's, our surroundings. It has, Venus's function is to establish and create harmony within our lives, along with, beauty and the arts. And there's a lot of other dynamics that Venus represents. And so say someone doesn't have a very well integrated Venus, right? Maybe in their astrological chart, we see that it's in a difficult position, right? Maybe it's not in a sign that it likes to be in. Maybe it's in challenging relationships to other planets that shows, Venus is struggling over here, right? And maybe this person has difficulty in relationship. Maybe they feel really isolated or closed-hearted, or they're constantly repeating the same patterns in relationships over and over and over again, right? And they're like, why is it that I keep attracting these same kinds of people with the same kinds of problems, over and over and over again? And it's like, well, you're the common denominator in that relationship. Maybe it's not them, maybe it's you. And so we see that this Venus is trying to get this person's attention, right? It's trying to wake them up. And maybe there's that thoughts of loneliness or feelings of loneliness, or, struggling with that ability to be in harmonious relationship. And over the years, maybe sometimes that, and not always, but sometimes these things can manifest in the body. And so Venus governs the urinary tract and the kidneys, also governs the reproductive system, also relates to the veins in the body, right? So maybe this person with this struggle with Venus, maybe they develop chronic urinary tract infections, or maybe they get a kidney stone, or maybe they end up with varicose veins, or maybe they end up with some form of health problem in the reproductive system. So these are all things that are all correlating to Venus, right? And sometimes they'll just stay up here on this level, and sometimes if we really need to learn that lesson, it can ultimately trickle down into the mind and into the emotions and ultimately into the body. And so in the perspective of alchemy, this is all the way that life is trying to teach us. It's the way that these archetypes are trying to wake us up to say, hey, these are the things that you need to learn in order for you to express my virtues in a very beneficial way, right? In a healthy way, so that someone can have healthy relationships and they can have good boundaries in their relationships. They can be open-hearted, they can be loving, they can be caring, they can be kind and compassionate, that they can have creative self-expression, they can create beauty and appreciate beauty, right? These are all things that are related to Venus. And so in alchemy, we really look at life as a school, right? And there's these, according to the, from the astrological orientation, it's like there's these 7 main headmasters, so to speak, that kind of govern these different schools of life, right? And sun and moon and Mars and Venus and Jupiter and Saturn and Mercury. And then there's these three grand headmasters kind of on a different plane of those three outer planets, right? Of Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. And these planets are trying to teach us. And so in that way, and the elements are the same way, right? And so we see that our illness is our initiation, right? That it is the thing that we need to experience, that we need to go through, that we need to struggle through to make it out on the other side more whole, more integrated, more in harmony with life. And so I always like to refer to this as, taking our trauma and turning it into our transformation. And so this is where our work as an herbalist that is working with the alchemical lineage, when you're working with a person, it's kind of like detective work, right? It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. It's like when you're putting a puzzle together, it's like you've got all these different pieces, right? You have all these different pieces of a puzzle, and the picture's not super clear, right? But you see, oh, this piece connects to this piece, and that piece connects to that piece. And sometimes you get whole sections of that puzzle done, right? And I'm starting to get a little bit of sense for what the picture is here. And maybe you got a big piece over here that you're starting to, and then all of a sudden they come together, and all those pieces come together, and you see the whole picture present there. Working with a person is like that, right? And the goal of the alchemical herbalist is to understand that person and see what the core archetypal patterns that are present in this person's life, and then working with corresponding remedies that will help them work through those archetypal forces, right? So this is where spagyric medicines come in. Remember, in the last part in the series, I was sharing with you about how spagyrics, or alchemical herbal pharmacy, is like a cosmological medicine making or a spiritual pharmacy, whereby you're not only harvesting and preparing the plants, but you're harvesting and preparing the planetary and the elemental forces that are most strongly embodied in that plant. And we're doing that through, picking the remedies and taking them through those spagyric processes like distillation and fermentation and calcination and crystallization and all these different steps. You're doing all those parts of the process in alignment with really the constitution of the plant, kind of the planetary and elemental signatures in that plant, so that your complete spagyric medicine not only is a chemical, energetic, and spiritual concentration of the herb, but it's also a concentration of the planetary and the elemental properties of that plant. So when you're working with someone with that, say, Venus imbalance, you would administer to them what we call a sympathetic remedy. And sympathetic meaning that it's similar in nature to what that person, the archetype that person is struggling with. So in this case, we might work with something like wild rose, or we might work with something like lady's mantle, or perhaps something like pulsatilla. These are just some examples of Venus plants. And typically, you don't, it's not just you select any old Venus plant, but you really find the Venusian plant that is going to best match what that person is struggling with, especially if they've got physical health problems, right? Pulsatilla works very differently than lady's mantle from an herbalist perspective, right? So we want to make sure we're selecting a remedy that's indicated for their constitution and their tissue states and their condition and things like that. But what happens when you take a spagyric into your body in that way is that it's not only moving through the, Venusian organ systems, but it's also, what it's really doing is it's moving through the astral body, which in alchemy is kind of the equivalent of what in Chinese medicine we might think of as the meridians, or in Ayurveda we might think of as the nadis, right? The kind of subtle energetic circuitry of the body. And that astral body, as it's called in alchemy, is that mediary between the physical being and the subtle being. So it's working through the body, but it's also working through the mind and the emotions and the soul. And when administering that sympathetic remedy, what it's doing is it's bringing you into a relationship to that archetypal force. You're kind of like aligning your whole being to this archetypal power, and you're kind of calling it into your life to help you, right, in a healing medicinal way. So that plant acts as sort of a bridge between you as microcosm and these astral forces in the macrocosm. And it's coming to help you work through that pattern around Venus. And so interesting things really start happening, right? Oftentimes people's dream activity gets increased as we start getting healing dreams and receiving messages and teachings through our dreams. Oftentimes, for lack of a better term, all of our shit comes to the surface, right? So all of our past traumas and, all the stuff that we haven't really worked through or dealt with in our lives, tends to percolate up to the surface. So now all of a sudden, maybe that past relationship that you never really resolved things with, you bump into them at the store, or they call you, or you start having dreams with them. It's bringing all this stuff up so that you can work through it and transform it, and then integrate the lessons and the teachings that life is trying to present to you so that you can move forward, right? So that's that process of taking trauma and turning it into your transformation. And so it's balancing you as microcosm to these astral forces in the macrocosm. It's all about coming into alignment, coming into harmony with these underlying forces of nature. And the ultimate goal from a spiritual perspective of alchemy is that we find a perfect balance of those archetypes, that we are whole, we're integrated, we're able to draw upon these different parts of ourself and utilize their energy and their teachings in a healthy way, and kind of expressing their most virtuous qualities. Because each of these archetypes has kind of like, I hate to say, like a dark side, right? Like a not so positive quality, right? Like Venus can, sometimes Venus can be manipulative, or Venus can be very envious or jealous of other people, right? And really thinking negative towards other people. That's not super harmonious, right? But when in a balanced state, in a virtuous state, Venus is very loving and very kind and very accepting of people, of who they are, and very, knows how to have balance in relationship with others, right? And so the alchemical process is really this journey of working through these different archetypes so that we can come into a good relationship with them and express them in a healthy way. So it's a very different approach to herbal medicine, right? This is not just, you have a UTI, take some Uva Ursi because Uva Ursi is good for a UTI. It's like, well, why do they have the UTI, right? Is there something else going on here that's beyond just some bacteria got up into your urinary tract and got you an infection, right? There's a deeper meaning behind why we end up with the health problems that we have. And alchemy is this incredibly powerful tool that allows you to effectively decipher what that message is and help someone understand what that message is, and then have this living, healing intelligence of the earth in the form of medicinal plants guide people along that healing journey. And that really is why I think alchemy is so applicable to our modern world, and why I think these spagyric forms of herbal medicine can be incredibly helpful for the different levels of challenges that we're all going through on this earth collectively and individually. And I think that there's a lot of room for us to help people in the ways that they need and that they want, because the modern herbal client is not just looking for herbal band-aids. They're looking for deeper levels of transformational healing on the physical, psychological, and spiritual levels. So just wanted to share a little bit more about kind of how spagyrics work and how alchemy sees our journey of healing. And because I really feel like it is a very different perspective than what we get in, typical alternative medicine books or herbal education. It's a different way of seeing things. And to me, it's vitally important for us as herbalists to see things from a different perspective, because let's face it, by the time a lot of people get to the herbalist, they've been to an acupuncturist, they've been to an MD, they've been to an ND, they've been to all kinds of different practitioners, and maybe nothing worked. And they're like, well, I guess I'll go see the herbalist. And so this lens of alchemy gives you a whole other way of looking at and understanding what a person is going through, and then a whole other set of tools that you can use to effectively heal them. So I hope you've enjoyed this 4-part series on alchemy and herbalism, and hopefully it's given you a little bit of perspective and inspiration on the potency and power of combining herbalism and alchemy. But obviously I can't give you teach you everything there is to know about alchemy here in just on the blog, but I do have a much more in-depth, totally free training series that I would love to invite you to. It's called the Herbal Alchemy Training Sessions. And I'm going to be sending you an email in just a few days, sending you an invitation to join me in this much more in-depth exploration of utilizing the alchemical tradition in your work with people and plants as an herbalist. So I'll be even taking you into my spagyrics lab and walking you step by step through some of the core processes that you use to prepare spagyrics, as well as some super simple ways that you can start preparing your own simple spagyric tinctures at home, along with the overarching cosmology of alchemy and the philosophy and the practice, so that you can really start to kind of reap the benefits, so to speak, of this powerful synergy of alchemy and herbal medicine. So keep an eye out on your inbox. I'll be sending you a link to join the Herbal Alchemy training sessions very soon. So keep an eye out for that. And again, it's totally free. So it's a great opportunity for you to get a much more in-depth, deep dive training from me on this subject. So thank you so much for tuning in to this 4-part series. If you missed any of the previous 3 parts in this series, be sure to check your inbox. You should have some emails from me about it, or you can just go back on the blog and find them that way. And I look forward to seeing you in the Herbal Alchemy training sessions and on future episodes here on the blog and podcast. So thank you so much again for being a part of the Evolutionary Herbalism community. And until next time, take care and be well.